Good evening. Do we live in an age of politics of easy answers? Well, we certainly live in an age where I fear many professional politicians don't even understand the question. Certainly not the question that many ordinary folk are asking themselves. There is in this country a mood of what I think can best be described as political insurgency. It's not just in this country, but throughout the wider Western democracies. At the last election, nearly 4 million people voted for my party, for UKIP. In Scotland, the Labour Party, which had been in a majority in Scotland for as long as anyone could remember, was almost wiped out. Now we see the Labour Party electing that most unusual thing in Western stuff, a frontbench leader who actually believes in something. In Spain, we see the rise of insurgency in the form of Podemos. We see in Sweden the softly named Social Democrats, who I would suggest anything but that soft. And then, of course, in the United States, we see political insurgency with the Tea Party Trumpists. Something profound is going on, and those in Westminster can't understand it because they're part of the problem. Now, it's easy to dismiss political insurgents, these new radicals. It's easy to sneer, and there are plenty in Westminster who do that. But this is lazy punditry. I've heard pundits say that somehow all these insurgents are anti-modernity. What if it's the case that modernity actually makes this insurgency possible? What if it is itself a product of changed expectations about what we should get from our so-called leaders? It's very easy to scoff at the example, for example, at Jeremy Corbyn's suggestion of quantitative easing for the people. Many a journalist has scoffed at this until you stop and think, hang on, we've got quantitative easing for banks. We've got massive bailouts for banks. So what's so daft about Comrade Corbyn's idea? It's very easy to mock the fact that Jeremy Corbyn has some foreign policy ideas that strike many people as daft. But David Cameron doesn't appear to have a foreign policy at all. It's easy to roll our eyes and scoff at Donald Trump's obsession with controlling the border with Mexico until you stop and realise that plenty of US government officials have been promising successive generations of Americans that they can control the sea level. We ought to ask why it is that people feel disaffected. Not what is wrong with the people who feel this sense of disaffection, but what is wrong with the political system. And I put it to you that politics has become a cartel, a fix, a scam run for vested interests. Parties are supposed to enable people with votes to make choices. Parties started out representing particular sectional interests. The Labour Party used to represent the interests of organised labour. My own former party used to represent that of business. I would say that both parties now only represent one sectional interest, and that is that of career politicians. The reason why parties no longer offer people choice is because the big corporate parties have been captured by vested interests. In fact, I would say the two big corporate parties diminish choice for the voter. Look at the fact that in most seats in England and Wales, you have a safe seat syndrome. There were 5 elections from 1987 to 2005, and in 4 of those 5 general elections, fewer than 1 in 10 seats changed hands. Even in the Great Labour landslide of 1997, only 3 in 10 seats changed hands. In other words, if you're an MP in the House of Commons, you stand a greater chance of losing your seat because you fall out with your whips or you have a boundary change than because you're rejected by the voter. And of course, this is reflected in the conduct of these career politicians. They answer inward to whips. Parties have increasingly narrow selection processes. Look at who become MPs. They're at the same sort of PPE degrees at the same sort of Oxford universities. They go from there to work in the same offices, counting paperclips as special advisors for the same in-crowd, and they get parachuted into the same seats. They're marinated in the same sort of groupthink from an early age. Is it any wonder we don't get a full spectrum of policy options and choices put to us? This reduces politics to an exercise in groupthink, a managerialist, technocratic tinkering. Of course, there are good people in politics, don't get me wrong, there are really tremendously good people in the House of Commons. But if you're told how to vote by your whips every day, every night, and you never defy them, where do you get the chance to exercise that goodness and that virtue? We've created a political system that rewards sycophancy, that rewards people not to think originally, that hands out promotion on the basis of people accepting what George Osborne and the clique around him want you to think. Look at what groupthink has done to this country. Before the 2007 crash, we had a banking catastrophe building up and no one saw it coming. No one in the group-thinking Westminster bubble realised that fractional reserve banking that creates credit out of nothing leads to successive disasters. No one was asking these questions. It must have been like a board meeting of Northern Rock. They were enjoying being on the executive board, but no one was actually asking the basic questions, and that's how this country is run. Look at the issue of mass mobility of labour. We live in a world where we're going to get ever more labour mobility, and I think a thoroughly good thing too. The next generation is going to live and work and play in other countries like never before. But who in government is devising a system that allows us to seamlessly move from one country to another? We have in London an Oyster card system that allows people, 4.2 million people a day, to log in and log out. Who in Westminster is fundamentally changing the migration system so that people can accept the need for labour mobility, which they must? No one. And then there's the group think about the EU, the insistence that we must tie ourselves to the world's any declining trade war. The EU covers 7% of the world's population, and yet the groupthink in Westminster says we must bind ourselves to it for prosperity. The elite, I believe, are useless. They took a catastrophic, inept decision to invade Iraq, to bomb Libya, to bind us to TTIP. This is groupthink corporatism at its worst. We need political insurgency. I will just leave you with two thoughts. Political insurgency needs to ask hard questions of itself. Number one, political insurgency must never blame the sense of the other. And I'm afraid that up until now, many political insurgents on left and right have done this. On the left, they blame the 1%. In Scotland, they blame England or the Red Tories or whatever. And on the right, too often people have blamed migrants. Political insurgency must not be about blaming the other. Political insurgency needs to be optimistic. The world is getting better. There are many things about the world that are bad, but we live longer, happier, healthier lives than ever before. Infant mortality isn't just falling in sub-Saharan Africa. It's fallen by half in this country since 1990. So much about the world is getting so much better. People have more control over their lives than ever before. This country is a better, more tolerant, more open society than it was when I was born in the 1970s. It's getting better in so many ways. The one thing that hasn't got better is the way we do politics. We need far-reaching political reform in this country so that we can have people who decide public policy accountable to us, prepared to ask the difficult questions, and who recognise that things don't have to be like this. Things can be better. Thank you.